Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. We're going to take a look at the outlook for the North Carolina economy going forward. If you'll remember, those of you here last time, it was a happy occasion. We announced that it was over and the economy was recovering. And today what we're going to do is to talk about how that recovery is going. So that's the positive side of things. It's not going as well as we'd like it to go, but it is still underway with a lot of mixed signals out there, and we're going to try to kind of walk our way through those mixed signals to try to figure out what's in store for us for the rest of this year, okay? The economy is recovering, no question about it. It's a fact. Things are going along fine. If you look here, this is the recession, and man, it was a tough recession. When we look back, if you've attended these things before, we've done a comparison of how this recession looked compared to the 2001, the 91, and also back to the 82 recession. And this one clearly is worse than any of those. It's the worst post-World War II recession that we've had. And this is the GDP numbers. And as you can see, we had 4 quarters in a row. And in reality, it's really been a 6-quarter recession. And that's just so much longer than any other recession we've had. This little blip right here in the second quarter of 2008 we've talked about before, and that was a result of the $160 billion stimulus package under the Bush administration, where they sent everybody back, not everybody, but most everybody back, either a $600 or $1,200 check, and said go out and buy something real quick. And people did, because they didn't know what was coming later that year. And so they went ahead and spent that money instead of saving it. And it did have a little blip in the economy. So in reality, this has been 6 quarters in a row, a year and a half of declining GDP in real terms. In the third quarter of 2009, we had an uptick, a little bit of one. And then in the fourth quarter, everybody talks about first it was 5.7, it was revised to 5.9%. That's an annualized rate. That's a strong, if we were to extend this chart back, that quite a ways back. It's back about 5 years before we had anything that approached that level of growth on a quarterly basis. But the problem with that quarterly growth rate is that personal consumption was only up 1.7%. And remember, consumption is 70%, 68, 70% of the economy. That did not rebound all that strongly. This was basically as a result of inventory buildup, primarily because of the bleed down in inventories that companies experienced during the 6 quarters of downturn in the economy. The inventories just got so thin that it became time to replenish those inventories. And so that was a lot of what generated this 5.9% growth rate. So recovery is underway, 2 quarters in a row of recovery nationally, but the question is, where are the jobs? And we're going to focus a little bit this morning, in the first part of this presentation, on exactly that issue. We're going to talk about jobs. One of the questions I get all the time when reporters call me is, well, where are the jobs going to be? Okay, we've lost 8.4 million jobs nationally. We've lost almost 300,000 in the state. Where are the new jobs coming from to replace those jobs that we lost? And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but we're going to really document what's happened here in terms of the types of jobs. This is an interesting chart here, and I just wanted to point this out so everybody gets a little bit comfortable with the North Carolina economy. If we were to take a look from December of 2000 through December of 2007, and that's sort of the beginning of the decade, to December of 2000, and the last month before the recession began, which was December of 2007. So we take a look at that period, that 7-year period, and we ask a real simple question. What states had the strongest absolute growth in jobs during that period of time? And as it turns out, North Carolina was 5th in the nation. Texas was 1st, California, Florida, Arizona. None of these are surprises. They're the usual suspects. We turned out 5th. It was only a 6.5% growth rate, similar to California's, but nevertheless, in terms of absolute jobs created during the decade, we turned out to basically produce the 5th largest growth of any state in the nation. All right? And we spin that ahead and we look at job losses, okay, over the last 2 years. As it turns out, we also unfortunately, we're at the top of that list as well. California led the list in terms of job losses. They basically, if you look at this, if they can go back, they added almost a million jobs, and then they went ahead and basically lost them all. And so they're down for the decade. They've got fewer jobs. As a matter of fact, 28 states have fewer jobs today than they did in December of 2000. 28 states. We're just that far away from it. We're right on we basically lost almost as many jobs as we gained during the first 7 years. But here are the states that lost jobs. As you can see, we come in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're eighth in terms of absolute job losses. Almost as many job losses, roughly 6% decline in the number of people employed. And one of the interesting things is you see that and you say, we lost more jobs than the state of New York lost. And New York's over twice the size that we are. So that'll give you an indication as to why it's been so severe around here in this state. We've lost a lot of jobs, a lot of jobs. Nationally, we've talked about this before, over the first 26 months of this decline, in fact, we've had 26 consecutive months without a break where the employment numbers or the number of jobs declined in each of those 26 months, starting in January of 2008 all the way through February of 2010, every single month. And we heard this last month, I think we lost 36,000 jobs in February, and everybody's going, wow, we only lost 36,000 jobs. Well, that sounds good compared to some of the months in the middle of that when we're losing 700,000 jobs. But still, we haven't turned that corner in terms of we aren't starting to produce net jobs yet in the country. The February unemployment rate nationally stood at 9.7%. That's down from a peak of 10.1% in October. So things are a little bit better from the unemployment standpoint. But in terms of creating jobs, we still haven't begun to create jobs. In the state, there's a little bit of discrepancy in some of the numbers we're going to present today, and I've got to be real careful about that. A week ago, after we put the forecast to bed and started publishing it, and the March release of employment numbers had a revision in it, and as it turns out, instead of losing roughly 250,000 jobs over the 2 years, it just turns out we've lost 283,000 jobs. So that's a revision. It doesn't change the forecast any. All it does is say, those job losses during 2009 particularly were a little steeper than we thought they were originally when the revisions came in. So we lost 283,000 jobs over the first 2 years. Our unemployment rate in January stood at 11.1%. So we're over 1% higher in terms of unemployment rate than nationally. But you have to understand, again, eighth in the nation in terms of absolute magnitude of job losses during the last 2 years. And so that goes a long way into explaining why we've done worse than the U.S. in terms of our peak unemployment rate. And that is our peak unemployment rate. We still haven't started to see it come down at all. These are kind of just some summary statistics from December of 2000 to December of 2009. The U.S. actually has 1.5 million fewer jobs. North Carolina has about 5,000 more jobs than we did. But U.S. overall, as a result of this decade, 9 years of this decade, employs 1.5 million fewer people today than we did 9 years ago. We talk about the 90s being the lost decade for Japan. I think when we look back at this thing in a few years, we'll talk about the first decade of the 21st century being the lost decade in the United States economy as it relates to jobs. This is the other thing that's really very concerning. We've lost in manufacturing. The U.S. has lost over 2 million manufacturing jobs in the same during this recession. Over 2 million manufacturing jobs have been lost. Of the 8.4 nationally, we've lost 2.1 million manufacturing jobs just in the last 2 years. In North Carolina, we've lost 100,000 manufacturing jobs just 2 years. Okay, that's almost a fifth of our manufacturing jobs are gone. And I think everybody in this room understands that none of those are coming back. They're just not going to come back. Those plants that closed, that laid those workers off, are not going to reopen again at some future date. Okay, over the first decade of this century, U.S. has lost 5.5 million manufacturing jobs. So the cyclical impact the last couple of years has just increased the rate of job loss. But we've been shredding manufacturing jobs this entire decade at an alarming rate. Okay, we lost 1/3 of our manufacturing jobs in this decade. North Carolina's lost 300,000, over 300,000 manufacturing jobs in just 9 years. That's over 40% of our manufacturing employment gone, not coming back. This presents the really severe challenge going forward. Okay? Now, this is just the 2-year, the 24-month, in terms of where we've been hit the most. Now, remember we had 280,000 jobs we lost? You can see that almost 180 of them have come in manufacturing and construction. You can see where the jobs have been lost. I mean, it's really a very simple thing to understand once you take a look at this chart. You know, government's added jobs. As it turns out, education and health services have added a few jobs during this 2-year period. But most others have shed some jobs, but not a lot, okay? You know, professional services and business services are down considerably as businesses cut back on expenditures in order to cope with making sure they remain profitable. And we've certainly had some losses in retail trade jobs during that period. But, you know, when you take it all together, 180 roughly of the 200,000 jobs, 280,000 jobs were lost, almost 2/3, not quite 2/3, probably 60% were lost just in manufacturing and construction. Okay. These aren't coming back. Some of these will come back, but I don't think it takes a genius to figure out that over the next 4 or 5 years, we're not going to build houses or commercial shopping areas or commercial buildings at anywhere near the same pace that we built them during the period of from 2000 to 2007 for a variety of reasons. So while some of those construction jobs will come back, they're not going to come back in terms of anywhere near the 73,000, 74,000 we lost. We may get half of those back over the next several years, but that'd be about the extent of it. So we're really going to be looking right here on this segment of the economy to basically generate jobs over the next several years, okay? All right, so what's this recovery going to look like? Been here before, you've seen this. We're going with this one right here, the nice, slow, steady recovery. We don't think there's anything out there right now that's big enough on the horizon, despite all of the sometimes scare reports that you see. We don't really see anything out there that leans towards this double dip, at least not in 2010. I think we'll survive through this year, but it's going to be a slow, painful type of recovery. And here's the thing that I think is really critical to understand. This is not, what's happening right now, it's been a really, really bad recession. There's no question, 6 quarters basically long. We've had some pretty big dips in terms of GDP, lost 8.4 million jobs nationally, 280,000 jobs in the state. It's been a very severe recession, more severe than anything that anyone in this room has lived through, clearly. There's no question about that. But there's also been an underlying pattern taking place independent of this recession, and that is when we look at the last 3 recessions, okay, we've been seeing this increasingly extended period, okay, to get the jobs back that we lost during the recession. Now, the '82 recession was a pretty bad recession. Not bad as this, but a pretty bad one. '91 and 2001, they were not bad recessions. They were mild recessions, 8 months long each, okay, whereas this was a 16-month recession. And the peak unemployment rate didn't get past 7%. So, well, I think in '91 it got up to about 7.3, 7.4, but they weren't really terrible, terrible recessions. But in each successive recession, what you see is it took longer to get back the jobs that we lost, okay? And the 2001 recession, which some folks referred to as the jobless recession, it took 4 years from the time the recession started at that employment level till we went through the dip, lost jobs, and started gaining back jobs. It's 4 years. 4 years before we got the employment level back to where it was when we started, okay? All right. And here's just kind of a look at this thing. This is the '82 recession. These are the job loss. Start here with, 900,000, excuse me. Try that again. Yeah, 900,000 jobs, and you can see the, 900 million jobs. 900,000 jobs? Yeah, 900. Yeah, 90 million jobs. Thank you. I can't see all the zeros from this angle. 90 million jobs, and the trough was out 18 months, and then it quickly recovered. And the matter from when we hit the trough in terms of our maximum job losses, it only took 11 months to get the jobs back. And the peak unemployment rate there was 10.8%. So it was a really, then it took in '91, the trough was 14 months, and you can see it took almost 20 months to get back the jobs. Trough was 31, again, almost 20 months to get back the jobs. This was a long kind of slow decline and a long kind of slow return. There are a variety of reasons that we don't have time to go through that have been causing these extended, if you will, recovery periods. But we think this is critical to what we're going forward. It's not just this recession that's causing the problem. This trend has been going on for quite some time. We're getting away from these deep V recessions like '74 and maybe to a little extent the '82 recession, and we're starting to see these kind of recessions that kind of these nice shallow ones, but they last an incredibly long period of time. This is the unemployment rate information. This is the U.S. Unemployment rate during the recessions, and as you can see, we start, we take a look here at the '82, which is in green, and you can see the peak unemployment, the increase from where we started to the peak unemployment rate was 3.6%, and it took essentially for the unemployment about 18 months. When we looked at the '91 recession, it started at 6.5, peak increase to 7.8, I guess, yeah, and it was a 2.3% increase, took about 24 months. The 2001, as you can see, was much longer, only had a 2% increase up to 6.8%, but still in all, it was, it was a long period. And as you can see on the 2008, okay, which is this one right here, it's been much steeper than the previous ones, and it's been a 5.1% increase over the entry rate, okay? And so you get a sense as to, really the issue here in terms of, and I'm assuming that we reached our peak rate in October when it was at 10.1%, okay? It may not stay that way. It may actually rise again during this year and may extend that another 6 or 8 months. We're really not sure yet. There are a lot of reasons why that rate's gone down to 9.7%, but it's not because we've been creating jobs, okay? And then you can see, how long it's taken. This is for the unemployment rate. The first one was for employment levels to get back to where they were. This is for the unemployment rate to get back to where it was. This is again '82. This is the '91. This is the 2001, and this is where we are so far in the 2008-2009 recession. Notice we get 2 years for this recession, and the others we only got 1 year for those recessions. So that's an indicator as well. So this is where we're going, and this is how it's, and this one here, we got to get down to 5%. You follow that trend line, and you get a sense as to what it will be. Now, again, that's just not enough data to start to make a real serious trend line, but you get the sense when people are starting to talk about this recovery, which began somewhere in the summer of 2009, maybe June, July, who knows. But when it began, till the point in time when we go, whew, that was rough. People are talking, economists are saying this can be a 4 or 5 year recovery. I mean, even the president's forecast this year is suggesting no better than 100,000 jobs per month gain. And that's not going to make much of a dent. That's 1 million jobs between now and the end of the year. If that optimistic forecast holds, it's not going to make much of, 1 million jobs isn't going to make much of a dent in an 8.4 million job loss, okay? So we do have some signs for positive recovery. There's apparently more stimulus on the way, and a lot of the stimulus hasn't been spent yet. Interest rates, they're still low, although the Fed is talking about what it's going to look like for them to start to raise the rate up. That could be problematic, but I don't think that they're going to do it anytime soon, and when they do, I don't think they're going to do it dramatically. And the trade deficit is a positive thing. I don't want to go, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because you've seen a lot of this before, but we'll just kind of go through it kind of quickly here. This is the gasoline prices. They're in a position where they're not a problem anymore. I think that when we take a look at what put us into this recession, we are going to find that this was caused by another oil price shock. That wouldn't have been as bad as it turned out to be because it got piled on 8 months later by the financial collapse. But remember, this thing started in December of 2007, long before there were any significant defaults, before any of the financial institutions collapsed. We started shedding jobs in January of 2008. And we've talked about this before. When you start taking, the gas price, it went up considerably in a very short period of time in 2007. When you start taking $150 billion out of Americans' pockets for every 50-cent increase, that $1.50 increase during 2007 is $450 billion out of the pockets of Americans. Remember the Bush tax refund was a stimulus package of about $160 billion. you take 450 billion out of Americans' pockets on an annual basis, that has an impact on the economy and spending, their spending, and what they can spend on, and it has a cost in terms of lost economic activity within the United States. And that's really, I think, what probably started this thing. Now, it never would have been nearly as bad had it not been kind of for the piling on, if you will, of the subprime crisis along with the financial failures in the fall of '08. This is, we talked about this before, monthly new home inventory, and it's down now at a point where we're going to start to see construction start again. We're going to start to see building start again. But my fear with this one is that a lot of this right here has been driven by the tax credit for new home buyers and the extension of that credit from $8,000 down to $6,500 for non-first home buyers. But that stuff's going to run out this spring unless it's renewed again, and I'm real concerned about what happens if that happens. This quick decline here down in October was kind of the rush, if you will, to get in before we thought it was going to end in November of 2009, but it was extended, and it will continue along. You know, I think it'll be okay, but we really have to think about whether or not we want to extend that home credit. The CPI basically is not an issue at this point in time, Consumer Price Index, and that allows the Fed to continue keeping interest rates low, which they have done. They're still running at essentially between 0 and 1/4% is their target rate for the federal funds. The trade deficit, this is the really kind of really interesting news. We had been running as much as $750 billion as recently as 2006 in the trade deficit. The 2009 trade deficit closed at about half that, at $381 billion. Imports were down 23%, exports were down only 15%, and that's what closed that trade deficit. So, you know, that's the really, really good news, that the trade deficit is at a point where it was at the beginning of this century, and it's at a manageable level if we don't get crazy again going forward. So, you know, we hear people talking about the new normal. You've all heard that term about how consumers are changing and households are changing, and one of the things they're doing is they're buying less, and if they continue to buy less, particularly at the bottom end of the marketplace where a lot of these imports were filling those needs, you know, there is some bright spots, if you will, going forward in terms of its effect on the U.S. economy. But there are a lot of issues for for a slow recovery, signs for slow recovery. Take a look at these. This is the one that concerns me more than anything, because I started this by telling you that 70% of GDP comes from consumption, okay? And unfortunately, consumers still are very, very nervous. I think the most disturbing thing was the February consumer confidence number dropped from January, and it dropped significantly. That's a significant drop, and it's, again, this should be around 100 if everybody feels good, feels average. That index number should be somewhere around 100. As you can see, it's been as low as 25 during this period of time, but that was during the fall of '08 when the crisis was really the January where the crisis was really, of '09, crisis was really, really at its height, and people were really, really scared that it was going to get a lot worse. It's bounced up a little bit, and but it's been bouncing around, and this February number is very, very disconcerting. I don't know what it is about consumers, but my suspicion is that as long as we keep getting job numbers that are not very encouraging, consumers are still going to be very nervous, or it could be the new normal. And how long that new normal will last in terms of the psyche of American consumers is really unknown. This is an uncharted territory, okay? So when you put that together, you've got this general increasingly long recovery periods that we've seen over the last 3 or 4 recessions. And then you couple that with, are consumers really changing their behavior? Are they not going to be 70% of the economy anymore? And that calls into question the strength, the speed of this recovery. Okay, budget deficits. This is my old chart. Okay, that was the budget surplus that they all talked about in the 2000 election. The locked box. They're going to lock that money away and all that kind of stuff. Remember what we're going to do with that surplus? We're going to spend it. We're going to give it back in the form of a tax refund, what have you. And then we've had these budget deficits during the first 8 years, if you will, of this decade. Or this new century, and you can see we got close to $500 billion as an annual budget. high 400s. But what's coming at us right now, I had to get a new chart and I had to get a new scale on it. Because, you know, this is where the old one left off. This is the 500 number right there, okay? And then, you know, we see this incredible dip down to where we're looking at over $1.5 trillion deficit this year. Some are estimating as much as 1.7 trillion, but at least $1.5 trillion in terms of deficit this year. And going forward, the most optimistic projections are we're still going to be running 500 to 600 billion in deficit through the end of this decade, through 2018, 2019, for as far out as we're looking and projecting budget deficits. There doesn't seem to be. And you know, one of the interesting things about this, and I don't mean to you know, this is not a political statement, but these projections do not include the health care proposal that is up this week. So whatever that does to the deficit in real terms going forward over the next decade, it's not here. Nothing like that's here. And the new jobs package is not here. So that kind of borrowing is not in this projection, okay? 2001, we had 6.2 trillion. We doubled that roughly in the last 9 years. And it looks like we're gonna add another 6 trillion over the next decade. And everybody is paying attention to, I'm sure you're all paying attention to the problem in Europe with Greece and potentially Spain, Portugal, and Ireland. And you know, remember, they have kind of these benchmarks about how big your deficit can be to your GDP. And you know, they like the 3% rule. Well, we're way past the 3% rule. I mean, our deficit this year is at over 10% of our GDP. So if we were in the European Union, we would be in trouble, okay? They would be sending in their accountants and auditors and telling us exactly how to cut back and be fiscally responsible, as they're doing in Greece. But we have one advantage that the Greeks don't have. We can inflate our way away from this, okay? That's not a very pleasant concept, but when we talk about the size of these deficits, the reason that the Germans and the French don't want the Greeks running those big deficits is because they don't want to have to inflate those deficits away. We can do that because we have control of our own currency. And so, you know, one of the things they talk about, whether it's Greece or Portugal or Ireland, is essentially leaving the currency union and going back to their own currency, which will allow them to inflate away their debt and devalue their currency in the process. Just a thought to be thinking as you leave this afternoon about the impact of 18 trillion, because that's over 100% of our GDP, okay? That's over 100% of our GDP. So the debt is past that 100% number, and our deficit is way past the 3% number in terms of the size of your annual deficit to your GDP. All right? However, despite all of that, because we can inflate it away, our dollar's gotten a little bit stronger recently compared to the euro. And that's good news, and I'll tell you why it's good news. I'm not a big fan of the strong dollar per se, but because we import so much oil, and I really do believe that, you know, an oil price increase right now would be very, very detrimental to the recovery. The fact that the dollar becomes stronger means that the oil we buy essentially becomes cheaper, okay? And that's a very good and very important in these early stages of this recovery. So that's one of the really positive signs. As it hurts our exports, there's no question about that, no question about that. But to the extent that it really protects us from another oil price shock, that's very helpful. This is one you've seen before. I've gone on and on and on about this. This is a number I've latched onto ever since the beginning of this, and that's the excess reserves in the banking system. And remember, we were talking that they run about, you know, I've been bumping along at $1.5 billion to maybe $2 billion. This was 9/11 for a week. You know, they couldn't get rid of, and they got it up to almost $20 billion in excess reserves, and then they got it back down again. And you know, at the beginning of this whole thing, it was just under $2 billion of excess reserves. That's extra cash hanging in the banks that they're not required to hold. And then we had to get a new chart again, and after it bumped, you know, in the first 4 months after the collapse in August of 2008. It bumped on up to $800 billion roughly in basically 4 months. And then we started seeing it come down, and we were like, oh, okay, it's over. But you'll notice what's been going on. This excess reserve number keeps going up. And when I did it this time, it went up in February up to almost $1.2 trillion. You know, it's like, This is excess. Yeah, this is after they paid the money back. Yeah. Oh, they could write the $45 billion check. There was no problem. Oh, they had a lot more cash in their bank than that, in their vaults, than $45 billion. Okay. Remember, Bank of America is 20% of the bank. So, well, never mind. We don't. So if the system's got $1 trillion, Bank of America is going to have 150 to 200 billion. So a $45 billion check's not a problem. Okay, but my point is that when I did this chart again for this presentation, I had to do the scale again because it went up past where I had the scale. Because I set the scale at 1.1 trillion, figuring it would never get past that, and it just keeps going up. It just keeps going up. And so if you're looking as to, if you're wondering where your recovery is, that money that's sitting in bank vaults that's not being lent, that's not earning anything, that is a big part of the really slow recovery that we're looking at right now. And there's a variety of reasons that, after the presentation, if you want to come up, we can talk about why some of this is going on, why the banks are holding these excess reserves. But it'll take a little bit too long to go through right now. All right. This is the new normal. This is the change in monthly change in consumer credit. And as you can see, consumers are shredding credit like crazy. Let's take a look at North Carolina and how it's been going, how things have been going on here, and what we've got in store for us for 2010. Let's take a look at this is our recession. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 quarters. Yeah, a year and a half. Ours was just a little later. We started in the second quarter. And we didn't get the recovery in the third quarter that the U.S. got. We didn't get the kick that U.S. got in the third quarter. They went up a little over 2%. We were almost flat, if you will, in the third quarter. Okay? What we think, and this is the first 3 quarters, and that's all the information we have. This is a forecast for the fourth quarter. We think we'll match the U.S. Expansion in the fourth quarter. Everything seems to indicate that, and I got a really good piece of news about the North Carolina economy that's not in the forecast, but we'll talk about in just a second. But everything seems to indicate that we've bottomed out clearly, and things are starting to move forward again. So overall, we're going to lose 2.8% GDP during 2009 when it's all said and done. But the fourth quarter will be positive. When we look at this thing, all but 2 of our sectors, okay, declined during 2009, and you can see the big one was construction. So we lose 73,000 jobs. Okay, which is a big part of it, and we had an 18% decline in construction output during 2009. Just a significant decline. And it was not just residential. I mean, when we look at construction, it's about half residential, half commercial. Commercial projects just ground to a halt as well. And again, the big ones, durable goods and non-durable goods manufacturing, they were both down. This is a complex chart because it gives you 2 pieces of information. On the horizontal axis, it gives you the growth rate. In this case, government grew by 6.6% during 2009. And on the vertical axis, it gives you, it's kind of like a pie chart. If you add up all of these, it's percent of the economy. So government makes up 13.5% of GDP. Services are 21.9%. If you add all these numbers up, you get to 100%, hopefully. Less rounding error. But they should add up to 100%. And as a result of this, you can take a look at the size of the rectangle and get a sense as to how big a role each sector played in what happened in the economy. We lost 2.8% in GDP, and you can see the big ones here are construction, durable goods, and non-durable goods, and also finance, insurance, and real estate, which declined by 3.8%, but makes up roughly 20% of the economy. So those are the big losers in terms of on the output side. Going forward for 2010, it looks like it's going to be a 3.5% growth year. Should be fairly stable for most of the year. That's a little below what we would see typically coming out of recessions. When we come out of recessions before, we've been growing at 4.5% to 5% for the first year coming out. So a 3.5% growth rate is slower than we would have liked to have seen, what we would have expected in previous years. But here's the good news. Most of the sectors are going to experience job growth, output growth. Big one here is, of course, services. Finance, insurance, and real estate will actually grow during this year again. It's going to pick up and grow. And if you put the 2 years together, it'll actually be bigger at the end of 2010 than it was at the beginning of 2009. Retail trade for the first time in 2 years will actually show some growth. This is transportation, warehousing, utilities, and information. It'll show some growth. But again, decline, non-durable goods, durable goods. Construction will show some growth, and that's primarily because of stimulus. That really is what's driving the construction industry. A lot of stuff will I know we talked about shovel ready in February of 2009 when we passed the first stimulus, but the truth of the matter is shovel ready occurred in the fourth quarter of 2009, and it will be most of 2010. So actually when you start seeing dirt being turned and barrels being put up, it'll be 2010, and that's why construction will be up this year. But again, it won't be up, it won't recover the 18% it lost in 2009. Okay? From a job standpoint, we lost 145,000 jobs, almost 146,000 last year. Every sector but government lost jobs last year. You see construction lost the most, but durables and non-durables lost a ton. Finance, insurance, and real estate lost quite a few. Services were only down 1% in terms of job losses. So while there were a lot of jobs that were lost in services, on a percentage basis, it wasn't very much. Here's the really good news. I saved it for almost like the next to the last slide. We're only going to create 36,000 jobs this year. So we're getting back not even a little over 10% of the jobs we lost in the last 2 years. We'd like to see this at somewhere between 70 and 80,000 coming out. However, okay, here's the really good news. Guess what? In January, North Carolina added jobs. It's only 6,000, but we added jobs. So we actually broke that 24-month period, 24 consecutive months where each and every month jobs went down. So January, jobs went up, okay? So I'm really confident that, in fact, at least for North Carolina, that we will, in fact, add jobs this year. You can see where they're going to come: services, finance, insurance, and real estate, although this won't replace all the jobs that were lost in 2008 and 2009, but it will start to bring them back. And as you can see, we're still going to lose jobs in durable goods and non-durable goods manufacturing. They're still going to continue. If we were to take a look at this chart 25 years ago, and I actually went back to some of the stuff we did 25 years ago and looked at the charts to make sure I was right, okay? You see durables and non-durables make up 10% of employment right here, 4.9 and 5.1%. If we were to go back 25 years ago, that number would be 33%. 32.9% of the jobs in the state were manufacturing jobs. This was the second, how explain it, second highest percentage of jobs in manufacturing of any state in the nation at that point in time. Okay, not the second highest number, but second highest percentage of jobs in the manufacturing sector in 25 years ago, 1985. So, things have changed dramatically, and manufacturing just makes up a very small part of our jobs. This is the real, when we ask about where the jobs are going to be, these are where the jobs are going to be. And fortunately, we lost 1% of them last year. We're going to grow by 2.7% services this year. That rectangle is pretty big because it's 40% of the total, and there's a lot of jobs there. And when we look at where these jobs are coming from, that's the bulk of them right there, is in services. Unfortunately, despite all of that, when we look at the unemployment rate, by the end of the year, that 36,000 jobs is going to put a little bit of a dent in the unemployment rate in the state. We'll drop from 11.1 down to 10.8 by December, but it's not going to be a big change in terms of the unemployment rate when we only create 36,000 jobs. And I think that we'll have a much better picture about how things will look going forward in 2011 when we come back here again in June. Okay, kind of a teaser. It's kind of a cliffhanger, but that was when we'll take our first look at 2011. But to be honest, I think that what I see is the recovery has begun. It's been going on for probably 9 months now, 8 to 9 months. We should start to see jobs reappear fairly quickly. We've seen it in North Carolina in January. I would be absolutely surprised that we don't see job growth nationally in March. That would really be a shocker if we did not see the job number be positive in March of this year. We'll know that. For those of you that are curious, just put this in the back of your mind. 8:30, first Friday in April, you'll get the jobs number. Okay, just go to the BLS and it'll be right up there on their website, front page. Okay, and but I really think that we'll start to see that. The problem is Not that this isn't over, not that we're not starting to generate new jobs, net new jobs in the economy and locally, but the problem is the rate at which we're going to do that over the next year or so is just going to be very meager. And as a result of that, things will start to get better, but they're going to get better ever so slowly and ever so painfully. My guess is that we're looking at if you remember back to those numbers we had where we had 30 months and 29 months and stuff, we're looking from this day forward another 4 years before we get back to the point where we say, well, it's finally over. It's going to take that long to gain back those 8.5 million jobs or 8.4 million jobs nationally. Probably another 4 years from now. So that'll put the whole thing at over 6 years. The 2 years of the slump and down to the trough in terms of jobs, and then another 4 years to work our way through that. There are just too many things out there that are, drags in the economy that are just not going to allow us to get that 5-6% growth rate for a couple of quarters, maybe a year, to really start to put this behind us and start generating 300 and 400,000 jobs a month, which is the kind of job growth that we need for a 6 to 9 month period to really kind of put this thing behind us and really change that attitude. As long as we continue to produce, as President Obama's forecast has suggested, 100,000 jobs a month, that consumer mentality of a new normal is going to continue to remain in their heads. When we're selling 17 million cars. Now this is not, this is a number that's got nothing to do with the financial bubble or subprime mortgages, but when you were selling 17 million cars annually and now you're only selling 10 million cars and no prospect to change that annually, that's what we're talking about. That's the new normal, okay? I wish I had better news for you, but the good news is, at least for North Carolina, we've started to generate net new jobs. And we'll hopefully build on that, but it'll be a little bit slow. I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you in June when I hope we've got some better news. Thank you.